What are the three big reasons people don't back up their data? What is the sad story that first interested Makani in backups? Does the cloud keep my data safe? What kind of malware shut down thousands of car dealerships because they didn't have backups? Do you need to start doing backups? Hmm. Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. I'm Nick and this is Super Simple Security Principles. Listen each week and learn how to protect yourself online no matter your skill level. This is episode 35, resolving the 3 reasons you aren't backing up your data. As always, joining me, our Master Guardian, Makani. Woo!
Hey, Nick. Yep. Let's
Makani,
see
how
if we
you
can.
doing, bud?
Doing well. Doing well.
Good. So, I'm guessing we're going to talk about backup today.
Yeah. Good. Good. That's not a guess, but yes, we are. And the as far as the answer to that last one, we'll see. We definitely want to at least make an informed decision. That's the spoiler alert I'll give right now.
All right.
Right.
Spoiler
So
alert.
the focus is not on how at all really today, but just like the whys, the considerations. Think about if it's if it's something that you feel like you're missing or not. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
So definitely going to be a little bit of a salesman in terms of promoting backups, right? I mean, I want to give
Yeah.
you the reasons to think about it and decide for yourself. But so okay, if I start with my sad story.
Let's start with your sad story.
And I honestly can't even remember if I've told you this one or not. I think I have, but I don't know. It's hard to keep track sometimes. Anyway, it's it's from the first year of uh, my first child when my first kid was born, and that wasn't the sad part, of course. That was awesome, but that's where the story starts. I took lots of pictures, and back then it was not on a phone, but on a good old fashioned camera. Well, it was a digital camera. I'm not that old, but the the camera could only hold so many pictures, and I kept having to transfer them to my computer.
Yeah.
And then, so like after about a year, I had like a year's worth of pictures on my computer, and
Right.
we lived in an older house and in an area where the electric grid needed some improvements. We had issues semi regularly. I don't remember for sure, but I probably wasn't using a surge protector even. I don't know. And you can probably guess where this is going at this point. You know,
Ooh,
we
this is a
we had a
personal story. This is real personal story.
oh yeah, it was brutal. We had a surge and it fried that hard drive, and I lost all those pictures. Basically, the whole first year of his life. Um, so as you might imagine, what I've been hyper vigilant about ever since is not only backups but surge protectors, which is a topic for another day. But uh, so here's the happy ending to that story. Not that I got him back, but since that time, I have lost uh, a, a piece of equipment. I think 2 times, a router, due to electric surges. Actually, in a different house, even. Despite consistently using surge protectors, so they help, but they're not a guarantee, unfortunately. And I lost a hard drive once, but that was due to mechanical failure of the hard drive, not an electrical surge. And I mention all that because despite all of those losses, in large part because of my dedication to backups, I haven't ever lost a single photo again.
Nice.
or
Nice.
any other file that was important to me, right? And that's been 20 plus years. So um, yeah. Now, before we move on, though, I wanted to see if there's any I don't know. Do you have do you have any experience or attempts with backup sad stories? I know you had a NAS, but
I
I can't
did
remember
have
if
a
you used it for
NAS.
backups. Like, what's your background?
I lost some photos. Luckily, I'm pretty sure you were able to recover most of them.
Oh
So,
yeah, I remember helping you with that. Yeah.
yeah. I'm hoping that I can find the USB that you sent me because we moved shortly after, and yeah,
Mm.
we so yeah, I'm hoping I can find that. I was actually thinking about that before this episode. I was like, "Oh man."
Right. So you at least had some kind of backup because that's where I was able to get them from.
Yep. I had had somebody tell me I needed some system. I'm still not sure what it was and how it worked, but it at least backed up my photos well enough.
Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Okay. Well, and my story is far from unique, really.
Right.
People been losing precious memories, hard work from computer for years, and so I guess we talked about the goal was kind of the why, and really one way I'd say that is maybe I want to help our listeners take one step anywhere towards not adding to that massive set of stories we already have.
Right. Right. Right.
And so the way I thought to do that is kind of just talk about at least three big reasons that I've seen that people don't bother to back up their data, resolve some of those concerns, and then this is not a case actually where I'm like, like with the credit freeze or some things, I'm like, you really should do this, everybody. At the end, this is going to be really your call. I just want it to be an informed decision.
Yeah.
So, um, and so to start with, Nick, actually, I'm curious, what are your reasons for not backing up?
Honestly,
Yeah,
I just don't think of it. It's not one of those things that I wake up and think, "Oh, you should back up your data today. You should do this." It's yeah,
yeah,
you know, I I don't want to have my own sad story, but luckily I haven't had too much of loss of photos yet. So, yeah.
yeah. Well, no, and that makes sense. And actually, I almost had that as one specific reason. I just didn't have a lot to say about it, so I didn't keep it in there. But
Yeah.
honestly, in terms of statistics, that's probably is my guess. If I could pull the number one thing, just don't think about it, right? I mean, life's busy. There's lots of things going on, and until you've been burned by it, right, like I did, then
Right.
it's easy to overlook, right?
Right.
I had that was, I mean, a blessing in disguise, I guess, in a way, right?
Right.
So anyway, that's good to know because I think I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of people will fall into that. So uh, obviously, if you listen to this, then we got rid of that reason. Now we've at least had you think about it for today.
Right.
So,
Right.
um, but the first reason that I did have on my list was just not knowing how,
Yeah.
right?
It,
Um,
it
eh,
seems difficult.
yeah, well, and even if you do think about it, right, and even if you did know how, it's still another thing on your to-do list, right?
Right.
And trust me, I'm a to-do lister. I've got an infinite list. It feels like so. I totally get that. Um,
Yeah.
so the way I'll try to resolve it is this: is I mean, I won't say it's not work, right? There's going to take a little bit of work, but one of the interesting things about backups is there uh, there's a ton of different kinds of tools. There's a lot of variety, different approaches, costs, trade-offs, and it's different than some other kind of security tools. Like it can really meet
Right.
a lot of different needs and unique circumstances. And I feel like with the right guidance and direction, which is where I come in, that you can mostly set it up once and mostly forget about it in a lot of cases. Very
Nice.
minimal ongoing work, right? So if you can allocate a little bit of time, anyway, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's the first pain. It's kind of like the freezing your credit we had, you know?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah,
Wasn't too bad once you got through the first application and
yeah. Well, glad to hear you've done that, and it wasn't too bad either. That's good, good to hear.
right.
So
Wasn't
anyway,
terrible. First one was like you said, seemed a little daunting, but then once you had the process figured out, easy enough. So there's a
cool.
plug for credit freeze.
Yeah. Okay, so reason number two, and we've got a little
Yeah.
story on this one too, but is the cloud. And sometimes that gives us what I'd call a false sense of security
Yeah.
because you just store it in the cloud and it's safe. And in a lot of times and in a lot of ways, it could be right. It just it only takes once though to lose it. And the story is and this is a real story, not a made up story, just to be clear. A couple of months ago, a fellow, we'll call him Tom, lost 1.5. I don't know. That's in my notes. A year and a half of photos because he was
Oh,
relying, yeah, right, even more than me, right? And he was relying on his iCloud backup. It was on an iPhone,
yeah.
and he thought it was totally safe, but something went wrong on the Apple side of thing, and so then when his phone died and he was trying to restore the photos like on his new phone or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
then the backups that Apple had of his photos, they were corrupt for whatever reason.
No.
He spent 2 days working with Apple trying to get them back, but they couldn't. They were
No.
gone. Yeah. And so the lesson here is that even a huge company like Apple, they can lose your data. And notice, like, this wasn't like they didn't have a massive hardware failure. Not everybody's photos got lost, but there was just a bug. Bugs just they're going to keep happening forever. They lost his specific data. Now it may have affected some other people's. I don't know the numbers at all, right? But
Right.
he was counting solely on that. He
That.
had him on his phone, and then he had him. He thought safely on Apple's cloud, and that was good. And then his phone died, and the Apple got corrupted, and that's all it took. Yeah,
Dude,
right.
that
Not a con.
sucks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not a common case, and so that's the thing. Like the interesting thing about backups, and this is true with a lot of security, right? Like it's not common, and so it doesn't feel compelling. And if you haven't been burned, it especially doesn't feel compelling. So that's part of the reason I leave it up to you, right? But it's just that the consequences are pretty darn painful when it does happen.
Right.
So it's this balance. It can feel pointless, but man, if it does happen, it really sucks. So, it's anyway. But the last point I want to make about the cloud is just that I'm not saying don't use the cloud. I'm saying if your data is important enough to you, and that's really the key question throughout this whole episode, is what data do you have and how important is it to you? That really
Yeah.
dictates how much you need to think about and work on backups. But just don't only use the cloud if it's sufficiently important. Like my backup strategy, I use cloud storage as a vital part of my backup strategy. It's one of the pieces.
Yeah.
Um, and in fact, next week's episode 36 is going to be all about a specific, entirely cloud based tool that I use called Backblaze. So,
Nice. Good, because I'm sitting here thinking, well, dang, I got to figure a backup strategy before I get burned. So I'm glad we've got a plan in place.
yeah. Well, yep, exactly. We'll talk about that more, the how. Now, I know you have photos in the cloud,
I do.
right? Um, and I don't know, is there much else for you that you try to keep, or, you're counting on to keep safe for you right now in the cloud?
Outside of photos would be the painful one to lose. Like I feel like I could find a way to get contacts and some other things that I would feel would be important to me, that I back up
Contacts.
as well.
Yeah, contacts. That's a good one. Yeah,
You
that's an
know,
important one. Yep.
if I lost the contacts, that would be brutal. In fact, truce, do we have time for a 30-second story?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, a buddy of mine didn't back stuff up, lost his phone, and lost all his contacts.
Oh, I
And
think I remember. Yeah. Keep going.
and so he he had this number in his head memorized, and he finally got the courage to text the number in his head that he had memorized. Who's this? And I thought he was joking with me because it was a good buddy, but like it had been a long time, like years had passed.
Right.
And so luckily he had my phone number memorized, you know, but
Yeah.
didn't know it was me, just knew that he
Yeah.
had some number memorized.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I look at some of the things that we're dependent on our phones, and that I would need to back up. A lot of stuff. Like even if I lost my calendar now, I think I'd be in trouble, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great. Thank you for sharing that story. That's a pretty funny one. I mean, sad, right, too, but kind of, yeah, interesting. Well, and I know for some people too, the cloud, it has good backup care. Like it's nice. It's a nice backup layer. It really is. But it also, and I was thinking this might be the case for you, but you didn't mention it. So maybe anyway, some people like to avoid the cloud because cloud tends to be lacking in privacy in the privacy department, generally
Right. And
speaking, right?
if I could avoid it, I would. Like I just didn't know any other means, and I didn't want to not have those photos backed up.
Yeah. Well, and doing private, photo storage, that's something that I've been looking at for a long time. I found some things I haven't explored yet enough to recommend, but I know a big part of what we're going to be doing is exploring, privacy, non-cloud alternatives for everything. I mean, even my backup layer, like there are ways that you can have as much security even without a backup or a cloud backup. Just anyway, there's trade-offs, but
Yeah.
I want to offer privacy options for as many things as possible. So we'll be talk about that a lot. Okay, reason number 3: it feels pointless. We kind of already touched on this earlier, so I won't talk
Yeah.
about this too long. Um, but I'll just say it this way: most of the time, it has exactly zero benefit. Right? If you don't lose
Right.
any data, then your backups, it's wasted effort. It's like insurance or wearing a seatbelt. It doesn't do anything for you most of the time. And backups are even one more removed. At least with the seatbelt, you know exactly what it's going to do and when, even if
Right.
and it's a low cost. You just pull it on. So anyway, I get that. I get that reason. And again, it goes back to what would it really cost if you did lose it? How
Right.
valuable your data is. And so, but I want to add the one piece I do want to add is bringing in that story, because one thing that backups uh, do, and again, this isn't a super common threat, but um, it's impactful, and it made some serious headlines just a couple months ago. Actually, I think we talked about it briefly. Anyway, it's ransomware.
Yeah.
And we know some folks who, run a car dealership, right? And
Right. Yeah.
were impacted by this, and even asked us about it. Um, and one of the protections against ransomware is having a good backup system, because ransomware, it's a form of malware that we've talked about recently a lot, where it, I mean, ransom gives you the real clue there. It holds your entire computer, it locks it up, and you can't get anything on that computer until you pay the ransom demand. And so, of course, if you have a backup of everything, though, if there's nothing stored on there that, and it could just blow it up, then you can just shut down your computer and restore it from backup, where, before the ransomware was on there, just start it up clean, then
Yeah.
you can ignore that demand. And so, again, not the most common, but it can be hugely impactful.
Right.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the malware, that specific ransomware with the car dealership, but thousands were shut down, and businesses are definitely uh, a huge target for ransomware, but individuals get targeted as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I wouldn't say, okay, well, protect yourself from ransomware. It's this. You should absolutely, like, it's reason enough alone to do backups, but
Yeah.
in my mind, at least add some weight to it. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Right. Right. Makes sense.
Okay. So that's the three reasons why people don't back up. And now I just want to give one quick reason. And this should be obvious from my story, but I think it bears repeating, because in some ways it's the most common and inevitable of all threats you face digitally:
Yeah.
hardware failure.
Right.
Right? We've all
Right.
had a device wear out or break, or not failure, but like it gets lost or stolen.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a reason to consider it, because it's going to happen to you sooner or later, and
Yeah.
you just got to make sure that you're prepared to either lose it or have the right backup so you don't lose it. Okay, that's all I've got before the call to action. Any questions or thoughts you want to share before we do that?
Before we get to our call to action.
Yep.
No, I look forward to, our future episodes and how we're going to teach backups and etc. But I think it's time to get to our call to action. Let's have it.
I know. Well, and that's always the hard part, right? Like
Right.
I'm here and we're talking about like the why and get you all worked up and the why, but then I can't, there's just not enough time to like dive into all the different backup strategies, and so I don't do it to torture you, right? But like
Right.
you just got to divide it up and take a break somewhere. So just know that it is coming, and it might take me 20 episodes before I get to it all, because there's so many things we're talking about, but it's not intentional. So, and if you're
Right.
anxious, come to the forum and we can get you rolling right away. So,
Right. We'd love to hear from you there.
yeah. So, here's what
So
I thought of to
I was gonna say, so let's have our call to action.
yeah. So, here's what I thought about is basically a little way to explore and answer for yourself, and remind yourself maybe of the data that you have, and evaluate how valuable it is or isn't to you. So
Right.
the way I'm thinking about this is just start thinking about the different activities, the things you do on your different devices, your phone, your laptop, whatever. And then ask yourself, okay, during the course of these activities, what data is created? And of course, there's photos, that's the obvious one. But another one that I've had in talking to people is conversations, that you've had over messages or whatever format that you do, that maybe are precious to you, or even you just want to reference or search later. Like, Kem is all about the being able to remember and search his conversations, so he's fanatical about that. um, maybe it's documents, stories you've written, or documents, flyers you've put together, whatever.
Yeah.
And so then once you got that, you're looking at all the data, you think about that. What would life look like? And, how it would be impacted, how would it change if you lost it?
Mm-hmm.
What would you be doing, saying, thinking, feeling in that moment if you lost those things?
Right. Think about it. What would you do if you lost your contacts?
Yeah.
Who would be
Ugh, that
somebody
would
that you would struggle to get a hold of?
that would be a big one for me. I have a bucket load of contacts that are really important.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. I hadn't thought about that one. And yeah, rebuilding that, right? That's a very hard one to rebuild. Not as hard as photos, of course, but still, that would take a lot of work. People calling me. Yeah, it would. Yep. So
Okay.
that's
So take
one.
some time
Yeah.
and evaluate what you hold dear that you need to back up.
Yeah. Well, and maybe I'll even put those questions, like, probably have, kind of refine them, nail them down, put them in the show notes, even maybe. But just ask yourself some questions, explore that. And specifically, I guess that if we're going to nail it down to one specific question is, what data are you actually creating? Because, when you're talking to people, you don't necessarily think of it that way, right?
Right.
But really, that's digital data that you're creating, and
Right.
how valuable that is or not to you is your own question, right?
Right.
But um, and I'd love to hear too. You gave me a new thought about the contacts, and love to have a conversation on the forum about what kinds of things that you thought of too, because, like, I'm glad for that reminder, right? Like, that wasn't as high on my radar as I'd really like it to be now that you mentioned it. And so I want to
Right.
actually, I'm going to think about it a little bit. Is my contact strategy as solid as I want?
Nice.
Yeah. So, and one last final thing on this is, listen to next week's episode, because we are going to talk about, I don't know when we'll talk about it in the future, but we'll talk about one how to. We'll be talking about one of my favorite backup tools, Backblaze, next week. So that'll at least give you something to work with. And yeah,
Fantastic. Woo!
yep. Okay,
Is that it?
that's it. Thanks, Nick.
All right. You betcha. That was a great episode. Nice job, dude.
Okay.
Okay, that's our super simple show today. If you're not a member of the IHP Academy already, please come join us for free. Stop searching the whole internet for answers and never knowing who to trust. Ask us instead. We made it super simple to find us, and it only takes 2 minutes to sign up. Just visit helpmegetsafe.com. Enter your name and your email. You're in. You can also find the link in our show notes. Thank you for joining us, and make it a great day. Bye-bye.